They laughed when I said I was working late, said I was probably just bored and single with nothing better to do. My brother raised his glass, toasted to real careers, and everyone clinked their wine like I wasn't even in the room. I sat at the corner of that long mahogany table, nodding, smiling, pretending the comments didn't sting. Like the hours I put in, the pressure I handled, the decisions I made, meant absolutely nothing. I was just their family ghost in a government suit. Then came the moment I'll never forget. The doorbell rang. My father rushed to answer it like a teenager meeting his idol, and there he was, his boss, the CEO of Westland Systems. Sharp suit, colder eyes. He walked in, scanned the room once, then locked eyes with me. And what he said next? Changed everything. "Good evening, ma'am. I've read your report. Impressive work." The room went dead silent. Every fork frozen midair. Every insult they'd ever tossed my way, suddenly echoing louder in that silence than they ever did when spoken. That's when I realized, maybe I wasn't invisible. Maybe they just never wanted to see me. My name is Harper Caldwell. I'm a colonel in the United States Air Force, but for most of my life, to my family, I was just the girl who dropped out of law school. They never asked what I really did. They never cared to know. But tonight, I want to tell you my story, not for praise, not for sympathy, but because if you've ever been the one they overlooked, the one they dismissed, maybe this will sound familiar. Before I begin, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments, or let me know where you're watching from. Sometimes just knowing someone's listening makes all the difference. Thank you. Now, let me tell you everything. The West Texas sun hung low over Amarillo, casting long, tired shadows across cotton fields that hadn't changed since she was a child. Harper Caldwell tightened her grip on the steering wheel as the old wooden sign crept into view. The Caldwells, since 1989. The house stood exactly as she remembered, faded red brick, sagging gutters, the same porch swing groaning in the breeze. Nothing had moved forward here, not even time. She pulled into the driveway slowly, her military-issued duffel bag nestled behind the driver's seat. Inside it, untouched since she left the base, was her perfectly pressed Air Force service dress. The silver eagle insignia gleamed against the blue wool, catching the light every time she glanced back. She hadn't worn it today. She wouldn't. Not yet. As she stepped out of the car, a familiar scent greeted her. A blend of grilled meat, lemon dish soap, and that faint, dusty dryness Amarillo wore like an old jacket. Her boots hit the pavement with a quiet thud, and with each step toward the front door, her chest tightened just a bit more. She rang the bell out of habit. After all these years, it didn't feel right to just walk in. The door opened, and there stood her mother, apron on, eyebrows slightly raised, as if Harper were a last-minute guest rather than her own daughter returning after 4 years. "Well, you made it," her mother said, stepping aside. No hug, no warmth. Just that same tone she used with the postman or a neighbor she didn't quite trust. "Good to see you too, Mom," Harper replied, forcing a smile as she walked inside. The house smelled exactly the same: lemon pledge, barbecue smoke, and nostalgia. A framed cross-stitch still hung by the entryway. Family first. Harper gave it a quick glance before heading toward the hallway. She'd always thought that motto ironic. In this house, family first meant read first. Her old bedroom hadn't changed. The same twin bed, the same bookshelf, even the sticker peeling off the wall. Harvard Law, class of 2015. A life she never lived. She ran her fingers across it, then moved to the dresser where her high school cheerleader photo still stood, smiling back at her in sepia tones. Right next to it, lined up with almost militant precision, were her brother's awards. Dean's List, Intern of the Year at Westland Dynamics, Leadership Excellence Plaque from the Rotary Club. There was no space on that shelf for commendations from the Air Force. She sat on the edge of the bed, back straight, eyes scanning the room. The silence was heavy, filled with things unsaid. From outside, the screen door creaked open and shut. Voices filtered through the air. Reed had arrived. Laughter followed, hers notably absent. She stood and opened the duffel bag slowly, her hands brushing against the cold metal of her own Air Force Commendation Medal. She took it out, held it for a beat, and stared into the engraved silver. Then she put it back. Downstairs, the conversation grew louder. Someone popped a bottle of wine. She caught fragments through the walls. Promotion, Reed's department, Frank Harlan's ranch dinner. Her mother's voice chimed in, full of pride. Harper reached for the closet and unzipped a garment bag. Inside was her service dress, still pristine, the colonel insignia stitched into her shoulders like armor. She held it up to the light, considered it, then slowly zipped it shut and tucked it behind a row of old jackets. Not tonight. She moved to the window and looked out. The horizon glowed gold, cotton fields swaying gently as the sun dipped low. She could see the empty grain silo in the distance, where she and Reed used to play pretend as kids. He was always the hero, the leader. She was the lookout, the quiet one, the extra. She wondered, not for the first time, if anyone in this house had ever imagined her in uniform. Not just imagined it, but seen it. Really seen her. Downstairs, someone called out, "Dinner's ready!" She straightened her shoulders, left the duffel bag untouched, and walked out of the room like a shadow moving through a house that forgot her shape. The door clicked shut behind her. No one noticed. The dining room hadn't changed much. Same cherry wood table, same cream-colored wallpaper peeling at the corners, and the same chandelier that always flickered when the air conditioner kicked on. But tonight, it was packed tighter than Harper remembered. Chairs borrowed from the garage crowded around the table, forming a lopsided oval of chit-chat and champagne flutes. Harper was the last to sit, naturally. Her name card, if one could call it that, had been scribbled on a folded napkin and placed near the far end of the table, almost in the kitchen doorway. It was the kind of seat meant for someone who wasn't expected to talk much, or be remembered. Reed sat 2 chairs from the head of the table, basking in a flattering glow of attention. "To Reed," someone toasted, already half a glass in. "The man of the hour." Everyone laughed, raised their glasses, and Harper forced a polite smile as her water clinked against fine crystal. She wasn't drinking, not tonight. Their father leaned in, puffed with pride. "Our boy's been put on a special project with Westland Dynamics. They're working with the Department of Defense on some big satellite system. Top-level stuff. Classified even, huh, Reed?" Reed chuckled with the practiced modesty of someone who expected applause. "Yeah, can't share too much. But let's just say I'm not just another cog in the machine." Everyone clapped. Forks tapped against plates. Harper picked at her roasted carrots. No one knew she was the one overseeing the security protocols on that exact program, the one Reed had no clue was crawling with red flags. But she stayed quiet. Not the time, not the place. A cousin leaned over and squinted at her. "So, Harper, where are you stationed now? Still flying those rescue copters, or what was it again? Over in Iraq, right?" Before Harper could answer, her mother chimed in, tones smooth like aged vinegar. Harper's had quite the journey. If only she hadn't left Harvard Law, maybe she'd have a nice office job by now. That earned a few awkward chuckles. Someone whispered, "Didn't she drop out after the first semester?" Harper didn't flinch. She simply took a sip of her water and nodded faintly, like she hadn't heard that line 100 times in her head already. There was no room here for correction, no appetite for truth. Reed started talking about stock options, the Westland buyout rumors, and how the company's new direction aligned with ethical engineering. Harper bit the inside of her cheek. If he only knew. Halfway through the meal, she reached for the mashed potatoes, but her mother's hand darted in first, scooping the last of it onto Reed's plate. "You need to keep your strength, hun," she said to him, then turned to Harper without a glance. "There's bread." The bread was stale. Aunt Darla piped up with the subtlety of a freight train. "Still don't get why a bright girl like you traded law for soldiering, but I suppose everyone finds their path, even if it's crawling through sand with a rifle, right?" More laughter. Harper's napkin had a splash of red wine on it. Accidental spill when someone passed a bottle with too much flair. No one offered a clean one. She folded it inside out and placed it in her lap. The candle at the center of the table trembled under the draft from the overhead fan. Its flame tilted like it might give up entirely. She leaned forward, straightened it carefully. Nobody noticed. As dessert was served, Reed launched into a story about how he once corrected a junior engineer who'd accidentally misaligned a signal array. "I told him, we're in national defense. Mistakes aren't just numbers, they're lives." Harper's fork stopped midair. She knew, in vivid detail, just how many mistakes had already slipped through Westland's cracks. She also knew no one at this table wanted to hear it. Not from her. Not yet. The rest of the evening blurred. Compliments about Reed's future. More questions she wasn't asked. She could have been anyone. A neighbor. A guest of a guest. When dessert plates clinked and someone raised another toast to the pride of the Caldwells, Harper excused herself quietly. She stood just outside the screen door, letting the breeze hit her full in the face. Her fingers grazed the outline of the eagle pin in her pocket, the one she'd never pinned to her uniform that evening. Inside, they laughed like nothing had cracked. Out here, she felt the shift begin. Not in them. In her. The morning sun slanted through the kitchen blinds, painting stripes of pale gold across the linoleum floor. Harper sat at the breakfast table with a mug of black coffee in hand, her eyes half focused on the way steam curled up and vanished into the still air. She wasn't trying to listen, but the voices in the hallway made it impossible to ignore. "Frank Harlan's invited me personally," her father's voice rang with unmissable pride. "Said it's a private gathering at his ranch. Only a few key people." "Means something, Harper." "Reed's coming, of course. His work's catching eyes in all the right places." She didn't look up when Reed entered, adjusting the cuffs of his dress shirt like he was prepping for a runway. "Big deal," he said, smirking. "You'll want to dress right for this. It's not one of your airbase barbecues. Frank's a man who notices class." That last bit hung in the air like smoke. Harper took a slow sip, then placed the cup down. "I'll go." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Reed paused mid-button. Her father blinked. Even her mother, who had just walked in carrying a basket of laundry, turned her head as if she'd misheard. "You'll go?" her father echoed, skeptical. She nodded once. "Might learn something." It was the same tone she used in briefings when she didn't want to reveal too much. Controlled. Steady. Unreadable. Later that afternoon, she returned to her childhood room to find a surprise laid out across her bed. A dress. Pale blue, high neckline, a faded relic from her high school banquet days. Her mother hadn't said a word, but the message was unmistakable. Harper stared at it for a long moment, then gently folded it and placed it back in the closet. On the opposite side of the room, her garment bag sat propped against the wall. She unzipped it slowly, revealing her Air Force service dress, perfectly pressed. The eagle insignia gleamed at the shoulder. She let her fingers brush the fabric, then zipped it shut and slid it back into place. Instead, she opened her phone and typed a single note. Frank Harlan, 11 a.m. Off the record exchange. The text sat unsent in her drafts. She didn't need to send it. Just seeing it on the screen reminded her. She had already had this conversation. With Frank. With generals above him. With the people who actually mattered. Downstairs, Reed was talking about stock numbers again. Westland's going places. I mean real global traction. Not just defense. Commercial expansion too. You watch. We're about to be everywhere. Her father chimed in proudly. Frank Harlan is the kind of man you want to learn from, Harper. Knows leadership. Built something out of nothing. Harper only offered a quiet. Sounds impressive. Reed shot her a look, half amused, half annoyed. Just don't show up in boots and camouflage, all right? This isn't one of your deployments. We're talking investors, directors. Show some polish. That night, she opened her closet one last time and stared at the uniform again. There was an old saying she'd learned early in her career. Real rank doesn't need to be worn. It's felt. She ran her thumb over the edge of her service ribbon case, then closed it gently. Let them wear suits and borrowed confidence. She'd walk into that ranch knowing she outranked every single one of them, even if they didn't know it yet. The gravel crunched under the tires as the Caldwell family's SUV pulled into the long, winding drive of the Harlan estate. The ranch house loomed in the distance like something out of a Southern Living magazine. Stone exterior, wraparound porch, string lights casting a golden haze over a manicured lawn filled with polished guests. Harper stepped out quietly, dressed in a slate gray blouse and navy slacks. Simple, precise, unremarkable. But even in understated clothing, there was a discipline to her posture, a calm gravity that couldn't be faked. She followed her father and Reed through the mingling crowd, nodding when necessary, speaking only when spoken to. Try to behave, all right? Reed muttered beside her. Frank Harlan's the real deal. Before she could respond, they were already within earshot of the man himself. Frank Harlan, silver hair neatly combed back, boots polished like a soldier's, sleeves rolled just enough to show the tan lines of a man who still worked the land he owned. Reed strode forward first, shaking his hand like they were equals. Mr. Harlan, Reed beamed. Reed Caldwell, systems engineer on the ECH-07 line. I've been meaning to introduce myself properly. My team's on the propulsion interface for... Frank's smile tightened into something unreadable. His eyes shifted, just slightly, past Reed's shoulder. Excuse me one moment. He stepped around Reed with the ease of a general bypassing a recruit and walked straight up to Harper. He stopped. Then, before anyone could blink, he squared his shoulders, brought one hand to his temple, and gave her a crisp, respectful salute. Good evening, ma'am, he said. The world tilted. The conversations around them faded to white noise. Forks stopped midair. Wine glasses froze halfway to lips. Reed turned sharply, confused. Harper's father blinked twice, then leaned toward her with a whisper that wasn't low enough. Did he just call you? What? Harper met Frank's eyes, calm and steady. It's good to see you again, Mr. Harlan. The honor is mine, he replied. I didn't know you'd be attending. I would have arranged a formal welcome. I'm just here with family tonight. He nodded, his voice suddenly louder, more official. Ladies and gentlemen, if I may introduce Colonel Harper Caldwell, lead military supervisor for the Guardian Satellite Initiative. Westland's most sensitive defense project is in her hands. There was an audible intake of breath from the crowd. One of the directors, a tall man in a blue linen jacket, extended his hand to greet Harper, but halfway there, he hesitated and instead stood upright, hands at his sides like a cadet in inspection. Reed stared, his mouth half open. Colonel? Frank turned slightly. Your sister's been briefing the Pentagon every month on your team's progress. The encryption layer you're building. She approved it last quarter. Or flagged it. I don't remember. You'll have to ask her. The silence wasn't empty now. It was brimming. Harper offered a polite nod, scanning the lawn. Eyes, all of them, watching her, seeing her. For the first time, her father shifted uncomfortably. Why didn't you ever... I thought I'd just enjoy dinner tonight, she said smoothly, as if she hadn't just set the entire room on fire without lighting a match. A hush lingered in the air for a beat too long before conversations resumed, timidly, awkwardly. But no one looked at Harper the same. Later, as she stood near the back patio nursing a glass of water, Harper noticed something. The very executives who had passed her without notice earlier were now stealing glances her way, debating whether to approach. One did. "Colonel Caldwell," he said, voice tight. "I didn't recognize you earlier. My sincerest, apologies." She smiled. "No apologies needed. I was blending in." The irony wasn't lost on her. For years, she'd fought to be seen, and tonight, without fanfare, without boasting, her name had done the work for her. Not as someone's daughter, not as the girl who left law school, but as someone who earned her title and wore it. Whether or not she needed the uniform, the very ground of her family's dynamic had shifted, and no one was quite ready for the aftershocks. The ranch party felt like a lifetime ago. Back in her temporary office at the regional base headquarters, Harper sat alone beneath the pale hum of fluorescent lights, her fingers scrolling through streams of encrypted logs. It was past midnight, and the only sound was the soft mechanical clatter of her keyboard. Line by line, she rechecked the subsystem protocols for Echo 7, the Westland satellite project that had everyone from DC to Silicon Valley buzzing. A pattern had emerged. A subtle redundancy failure embedded deep in the security code that controlled the navigation response. It wasn't a glitch. It was a risk. One strong enough to potentially reroute satellite communication. One critical enough that, in wartime, it could mean misfires, blackouts, worse. By morning, she submitted the report. The file was marked Classified Immediate Attention. She attached a formal recommendation to halt deployment until a full system diagnostic could be performed. Her tone was measured, the evidence airtight. It wasn't personal, it was protocol. But within hours, the backlash came. Her office phone lit up with call after call, Westland's legal, then tech, then public affairs. The words, overstepping, alarmist, and reputational risk were tossed around like confetti. Then came Reed. "Harper," he snapped over the phone, voice sharp with accusation. "Are you out of your mind? You realize what you just did?" She kept her voice even. "I followed procedure. The encryption flaw needs a comprehensive audit." "You could have called me first," he barked. "We could have fixed it quietly. Now you've put the entire rollout in jeopardy. Do you have any idea what that means for the team?" "For national defense?" she corrected. "Yes, I do." Click. No goodbye. That night, her father called, at 2:17 a.m. "Do you know how many jobs depend on that contract?" he asked, low and tight. "Do you know what it means if this story leaks? I brought you to that dinner because I thought you'd be proud of Reed. Of us." She closed her eyes. "I am doing my job, Dad." "No," he muttered, voice dry. "You're tearing everything down from the inside." The next day, a private meeting was held. Harper entered the conference room alone. It was cold, sterile, too quiet. Her seat was near the end. The projector buzzed with slides she herself had created weeks ago, but now others were speaking over them. "Perhaps we need someone closer to the technical architecture," one board member suggested mildly, "someone with more direct visibility into Westland's intent." Another added, "Colonel Caldwell's thoroughness has certainly raised the bar." But maybe that bar is now an obstacle. They smiled, too polite to be blunt. But the implication was clear. Harper sat still. Above her, a ceiling bulb flickered, stuttered, then buzzed back to life. Her shadow on the glass table shimmered for a second, fractured, incomplete. But she didn't flinch. Later, she returned to her office. On the floor beside her desk were her combat boots, scuffed, solid. Roots. She reached down and straightened them like she had done 100 times before every mission. As she logged in to submit her final memo of the day, her inbox pinged. No subject line, no signature, just one sentence. "Stand your ground, Colonel." Harper stared at the screen. She didn't know who sent it. Someone from the Defense Command, maybe, or a junior officer watching from the wings. But it didn't matter. Because the truth was this: the very people who had toasted to her title days ago now feared the weight it carried. Respect had a shelf life, and hers had just been marked as inconvenient. She looked out the narrow window across the airfield, the flag rippling in the wind like it had something to say. Small, yes, but steady. She wasn't just outside the family circle again. This time, she was a target. And she would face it the same way she'd always done, quietly, fiercely, without asking for applause. The restaurant was the kind that didn't take walk-ins. White linen, quiet jazz humming overhead, and candles flickering on every table despite the afternoon sun outside. Harper walked in, heels echoing on the polished tile, the subtle clang of silverware the only other sound. She spotted them immediately. Frank Harlan seated at a corner table, posture straight, eyes already tracking her, and opposite him, her father, dressed uncomfortably in a sport coat he probably hadn't worn since Reed's engagement photos. His face was tense, lips pressed into a thin line. "Colonel Caldwell," Frank greeted, standing as she approached. "Thank you for making the time." Harper nodded, taking her seat without ceremony. A waiter appeared immediately, pouring water into crystal glasses. She barely noticed. Frank began with practiced grace. "First, allow me to say again, we truly appreciate your thoroughness. Your vigilance is part of what makes this country's infrastructure resilient." He paused, letting the compliment sit. "But," he continued, voice softening, "you understand the situation is delicate. The impact of the report, if acted on too harshly, could have significant consequences for a lot of people. Jobs, funding, international partnerships." Before she could respond, her father interjected. "Harper," he said, leaning forward, eyes searching hers, "you know I never asked much of you, but this project, this contract, is more than a paycheck. It's your brother's career. It's hundreds of local families. Your name's attached now. All I'm asking is you be mindful of the bigger picture." She stared at him, unmoving. "You want me to soften the report?" Frank offered a conciliatory smile. "Not fabricate, of course not, just a recalibration. Tone, phrasing. The risk matrix doesn't have to read like a red alert. Something more balanced, more optimistic." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thin folder, sliding it across the table. "Here's a draft. Legal's already vetted it. All you'd need to do is sign off and submit it through the usual chain." She didn't touch it. Her father cleared his throat. "We're not trying to pressure you, honey. I want you to think about what this means. For the family. For Reed. For all the years I've tried to—" Harper's steak knife slipped from her plate, clattering loudly against the porcelain and bouncing onto the floor. The sound echoed, cutting clean through the air. She didn't reach for it. "I'm not sure what you think this uniform means," she said finally, voice low, even. "But I didn't put it on to help corporations dodge accountability. I serve this country. That includes protecting systems from failure, even if that failure is built by someone I share blood with." Frank's smile stiffened, then faded. "We can always reassess oversight on this contract," You understand?" "Oh, I do," Harper replied. Her chair creaked slightly as she shifted. The seat was loose, unsteady, like the ground beneath all of this. She let it creak again, the noise a subtle protest against the calm, polished pressure pressing in on her. She opened her wallet slowly. Inside, tucked behind her ID, was a photo. 8 men and women in fatigues, grinning in the desert sun. Her squadron, her real family. "I've already assessed the risk," she said. "And unlike this conversation, it doesn't come with wine and steak." She stood up. Her father looked up at her, hands clasped on the table, eyes pleading now. "Don't do this, Harper. Don't make this about you proving a point." "That's just it," she said quietly. "It was never about me. Not to any of you." She nodded once to the waiter as she passed, ignoring the untouched plate, the untouched wine, and the untouched deal. Behind her, the table fell into a silence deeper than any applause she might have gotten. Because the applause was never hers to begin with, but the integrity that she could live with. The digital clock glowed 3:13 a.m. Harper sat on the edge of the bed in her temporary quarters. Military-grade sheets still tucked tight, the silence only broken by the low hum of the base generator outside. She hadn't slept. Not a second. On the desk beside her, her laptop's screen glowed cold blue, illuminating the open document, the final report. Paragraphs she'd read a dozen times tonight, line by line, sentence by sentence, code string by code string. No matter how many ways she reviewed it, the findings were the same. The flaw in Westland's navigation algorithm wasn't hypothetical. It was real. And it was dangerous. Her cursor hovered over the send button. Her hand didn't tremble. She clicked. An encrypted email launched into cyberspace, addressed to her contact at the Department of Defense, with copies to the necessary oversight boards. Her subject line was clear, clinical. Final risk report, navigation security layer, no revision, recommend actionable review. She included the original timestamps, her personal verification, and a brief note. Report remains unchanged per initial findings. I stand by the assessment. She didn't dress it up. She didn't justify. She closed the laptop softly. Across the room, her uniform hung crisp and waiting. Not hidden this time. No longer folded into a duffel bag or buried in the back of a rental car. It stood tall on a hanger, waiting for her like a silent sentinel. She approached it like ritual. As she buttoned the top clasp, her reflection caught in the mirror. She didn't see the girl who used to be measured by her mother's disapproval or Reed's achievements. She saw a woman who had stared down the weight of legacy and said, "I am not yours to sculpt." Her phone buzzed once, a message from her mother. "We'll talk later, but don't make this harder than it has to be. Please." Harper stared at the text, then put the phone down, screen down. She pulled open the drawer where she kept a few personal things. From it, she retrieved a small photo, her first day of field command, a desert background, her team laughing around her, covered in dust and sunburn but grinning wide. She remembered the mission, the heat, the tension, the camaraderie. They had called her ma'am not because of protocol, but because they trusted her. That was the difference. She picked up her reading glasses, slid them on, and took one final look at the printed report beside her laptop. She didn't need to sign it. Her fingerprints were all over every piece of code, every decision. She left the hard copy on the desk. The desk lamp had been on all night. She left it that way. As she exited her quarters, boots in hand, she paused by the doorway. Outside, dawn hadn't broken yet, but the first light was rising, pale blue on the edge of dark. She called her lieutenant from the corridor phone. "Spin up Plan Delta," she said calmly. "Assume escalation review is imminent. Tell Cyber to prepare their logs." There was no hesitation in her voice, only steel. As she ended the call, the weight of what she'd done settled in, not like a burden, but a truth finally spoken. She wasn't fighting for approval anymore. She wasn't sacrificing for recognition. She wasn't that little girl at the dinner table waiting for someone to ask her how her day was. This wasn't about being loved. It was about being right, and standing firm in it. She didn't know if her mother would ever call back, or if Reed would ever look her in the eye again. She might lose them. She might already have. But that morning, as the sun rose in the distance and the base slowly came to life, Harper Caldwell walked into command not as a daughter trying to matter, but as a leader who already did. The news broke early that Monday morning. A quiet ripple at first, just a footnote in a defense tech bulletin. But by afternoon, headlines blazed across major outlets. Military whistleblower flags, multi-billion-dollar security flaw. The face in the thumbnail? A blurred image of Harper Caldwell in uniform, her name reduced to the initials, Colonel H.C. Harper was at her desk, sorting through operational timelines for a separate mission, when her lieutenant gently slid a copy of Defense Review Weekly across her workspace. She looked down at it, paused, and then calmly set it aside. The storm had begun, but for the first time in her life, Harper felt completely still inside. The Department of Defense launched an immediate internal audit of Westland's infrastructure. Contractors were recalled, deliverables suspended. Reed was formally suspended pending a full investigation into technical negligence and potential breach of reporting protocols. A few days later, her father's name was quietly removed from the partner liaison team at Westland. Nobody from her family called. Not to defend themselves, not to attack, not to ask how she was doing. But Harper no longer waited by the phone. She still showed up to work on time, still ran briefings with the same clear voice, still made sure every junior officer in her command knew their value. If anything, she operated with even greater precision. One morning, she stepped into a small corner cafe near base. As she reached for her usual black coffee, the older man behind the counter nodded slightly. "Good job, ma'am," he said softly. No cameras, no performance, just a quiet acknowledgement from someone who'd clearly read more than the headline. She nodded back. "Thank you." Later that evening, Harper opened her social media out of habit, only to notice her mother and father had unfollowed her. No big post, no farewell. Just quiet erasure. She stared at the screen for a few seconds, then powered her phone off and dropped it face down on the table. On her shelf sat a single medal, one she'd received 3 years ago for leading a high-risk extraction. Until now, it had lived in a box. But today, she mounted it in the corner of her room, not for others to admire, but for herself to remember. On her desk was a letter in handwritten script. It was from a young lieutenant under her command. "You're the reason I didn't walk away when it got hard," it read. "You showed us what integrity looks like." Harper closed the envelope gently. She marked her calendar with 2 red slashes, one on the date she sent the unaltered report, and one on the day Westland's investigation officially opened. 2 moments of clarity that split her life into a before and an after. For years, she had been the shadow at the table, the ghost at family holidays, the names spoken in a lowered tone. But now, she wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't waiting to be invited in. She had built her own damn place to stand. And standing there, she finally felt light. A week later, the Pentagon made a statement. Colonel Harper Caldwell's decision to maintain the integrity of her risk assessment had prevented a potential national security breach and saved the Department of Defense an estimated $4.7 billion in corrective measures. The words were formal, clinical, but the impact? Tectonic. Westland was officially suspended from all new federal contracts pending a full review. The quiet colonel became the media's favorite term. Ironic, Harper thought, considering the only thing she'd done was her job. She declined every interview request. She didn't want a spotlight. She wanted systems that worked, people that listened, a chain of command that valued truth more than optics. Reed was removed from the project entirely. Her father was reassigned to logistics, an elegant sideline in bureaucratic terms. No one said it outright, but the implication was clear. Their name had fallen from the trusted list. And then, one quiet Saturday afternoon, Harper stopped by her childhood home to retrieve a box of old academic files for clearance purposes. The house was empty. In the living room, beside the flat screen, on the second shelf under a faded family portrait, stood a framed photo of her in uniform. She didn't touch it. She didn't take a picture. She didn't even linger. On the kitchen table sat a folded note. No name. No handwriting she could identify. But the message read, "The kids saw the news and said, 'Aunt Harper's a superhero.'" She slipped the paper into her bag, said nothing, and walked out. In the hallway, the old piano stood where it always had. Reed had learned on it. She hadn't been allowed to touch it. Now it was coated in a thin layer of dust, with a piece of sheet music perched gently on the stand. God Bless America. Harper brushed one finger across the keys. A single note rang out. That was enough. In the entryway, two family portraits hung side by side. One older, where she was barely visible in the back row, and another, newer. She didn't remember posing for it, but there she was, this time full frame. A quiet addition, unexplained. It was the only apology she'd ever get. And that was okay, because in that moment, she understood. The truth hadn't just protected a project, it had changed the very walls that once shut her out. A letter arrived on a crisp fall morning, embossed with the seal of Westland's executive office. Frank Harlan's tone was direct but sincere. Your insistence on operational integrity preserved not only our project, but our reputation. I was wrong, and I thank you. If you ever consider joining us as a civilian advisor, the offer stands. Harper read it, then tucked it into a drawer. A few hours later, a separate email landed in her inbox. It was from her mother. Just one line. Your father is hanging your medal in the living room. Harper let the message sit on the screen for a long time. Then, slowly, a small smile curled onto her face. Not because they finally saw her, but because they no longer needed to be convinced. That night, she changed into her dress uniform and headed to the ceremony. It was a small event, just command staff, dignitaries, and a few select colleagues. She didn't invite family. She received the medal without fanfare. No speech, just a nod. Back at her office, a small package was waiting. Inside was a child's drawing, stick figures with big heads, crayon-sketched uniforms, and her name in block letters, Aunt Harper, our hero. She framed it and placed it on her shelf, just above the hard copy of the report that had changed everything. Later, as she stepped out of the building, a young private snapped to attention and saluted. "Good night, Colonel Ma'am." There was no sarcasm in his voice, no ceremony, just reverence. Harper paused. She returned the salute. "Good night, soldier." Then she turned, her boots echoing steady against the concrete, her bag slung over one shoulder, the same one that once held her folded insignia in shame. Now every step was firm. Every step was hers. She wasn't heading home to seek approval. She wasn't trying to rewrite the past. She was simply walking forward, knowing that somewhere, in the silence of things not said, ma'am had become the sincerest apology of all. Sometimes, the quietest strength is the one that stands alone, not to be seen, not to be praised, but simply because it is right. Standing for truth may cost you comfort, connection, even the love you thought was unconditional. But in that silence, you find a different kind of peace, the kind that doesn't ask for approval. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment, subscribe, and stay with us for more. Your presence means more than you know.